20 years ago, my husband's boat sank during a storm. They never found his body. Yesterday, I saw him giving a speech on live TV. It was him. I know that face, even after 20 years. My name is Laura. I was 28 when my husband, Daniel, disappeared. Everyone told me to move on, but I never stopped waiting. Daniel and I met when we were young, both dreamers, both broke, both unstoppable. He loved the ocean. I feared it. Maybe that's why I lost him to it. We met at a bookstore on a rainy afternoon in September. I was looking for a travel guide to somewhere I'd never been. He was reading a book about deep-sea exploration. Our hands reached for the same book on the discount table. When our eyes met, he smiled. That smile, the one that would haunt me for 2 decades. He asked me to coffee. I said yes. We talked for 4 hours straight. He told me about his childhood by the sea, how his father had been a fisherman, how the ocean was in his blood. I told him about growing up in the city, about my fear of deep water, about how I'd never even learned to swim properly. He laughed, not at me, but with this warmth that made me feel safe. He said he'd teach me to love the water, and for a while, he did. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It wasn't fancy. No restaurant, no ring hidden in champagne. We were walking along the beach at sunset, and he just stopped, took my hands, and asked me to marry him. I said yes before he even finished the question. We got married on that same beach 6 months later. It was small, just family and a few close friends. My mother cried. His father gave a toast about how the sea brought people together, but it also demanded respect. I didn't understand what he meant then. I wish I had. Daniel worked on cargo ships, short trips, good pay. We were saving for a house, a life, a future. He'd be gone for a week, sometimes 2. I hated those weeks. The apartment felt too empty without him. But when he came home, he'd burst through the door with flowers or some trinket he'd bought at a port somewhere. He'd scoop me up and spin me around like we were still teenagers. We had plans, big plans. We wanted to buy a house near the water. We talked about having kids, 2, maybe 3. We'd name them after places we wanted to visit. Morocco for a girl. Santiago for a boy. We'd laugh about it over dinner, making lists, dreaming out loud. He left on a Tuesday morning. Kissed me goodbye like it was any other day. 3 days later, the Coast Guard called. I remember every detail of that phone call. I was making dinner. Pasta, his favorite. The water was boiling. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer because I was stirring the sauce, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was professional, detached. They asked if I was Laura Chen, wife of Daniel Chen. I said yes. They asked me to sit down. That's when I knew. A storm hit off the southern coast. His boat was caught in it. They found debris, but not him. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember turning off the stove. I just remember sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the pasta boiling over, watching the water spill onto the burner, hearing the hiss of steam. I sat there until my neighbor knocked on the door, worried about the smell of burning. The Coast Guard searched for 3 days. They found pieces of the boat scattered across 20 miles of ocean. They found life jackets. They found cargo. They found his duffel bag with his clothes still folded inside. But they didn't find him. I waited. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Hope became a kind of torture. I went to the dock every single day for the first month. I'd stand there for hours, watching the horizon, waiting for his boat to appear. Other fishermen would look at me with pity. Some tried to talk to me, to tell me gently that I needed to accept what happened. I couldn't. His mother called me every night. She was grieving too, but she was stronger than me. She'd pray with me over the phone, reciting words that were supposed to bring comfort. They didn't. Nothing did. I hired a private investigator. Spent money we didn't have. He searched for 2 months, interviewed everyone who'd been working the docks that day, studied weather patterns, ocean currents, everything. He came back with the same conclusion. Daniel was gone. They held a memorial. Everyone said their goodbyes. But how do you bury someone when there's no body to bury? The memorial was on a Saturday, bright, beautiful day. The kind of day Daniel would have loved. That made it worse somehow. His father couldn't speak. He just stood there holding the empty urn, tears streaming down his weathered face. His mother read a poem about the sea claiming its own. I didn't read anything. I couldn't. People brought food to my apartment for weeks after. Casseroles I didn't eat. Condolence cards I couldn't read. Everyone said the same things. He's in a better place. Time heals all wounds. You're so young, you'll find love again. I hated them for it. Not because they were unkind, but because they didn't understand. You can't replace someone. You can't just move on like they were a chapter in a book you finished reading. I kept his clothes. I couldn't throw away hope. His side of the closet stayed exactly as he left it. His work boots by the door, his coffee mug on the counter, his toothbrush in the bathroom. People told me it was unhealthy. My mother begged me to pack his things away. I refused. At night, I'd pull out one of his shirts and sleep with it. I could still smell him on the fabric, salt water, engine oil, and that cologne he wore. Over time, the smell faded. I tried everything to preserve it. I kept the shirts in sealed bags. It didn't matter. Eventually, they just smelled like storage. They told me grief fades. They were wrong. It just changes shape. The first year was the worst. Every milestone was agony. Our anniversary, his birthday, the holidays. I spent Christmas alone in our apartment, staring at the tree we'd bought together the year before. I didn't even plug in the lights. The second year, I tried to get my life back. I went back to work. I was a teacher before Daniel disappeared. The school had held my position, told me to take all the time I needed. When I returned, the kids were gentle with me. Too gentle. They treated me like I was fragile. Maybe I was. I dated someone briefly in the third year. A colleague. He was nice, patient, understanding. But every time he touched me, I thought of Daniel. Every time he laughed, it was the wrong laugh. I ended it after 2 months. It wasn't fair to him. By the 5th year, people stopped asking how I was doing. I became that woman whose husband died at sea. People would whisper when I walked by. I moved to a different neighborhood, started over in a place where no one knew my story. The 10th year was strange. It felt like a decade should mean something. Should mark some kind of closure. It didn't. I visited the memorial bench his parents had installed at the harbor. Someone had left flowers. I sat there for hours, talking to him like he could hear me, telling him about my life, about how I'd tried to move on, about how I'd failed. By year 15, I'd built a life that looked normal from the outside. I had my job. I had friends who didn't know about Daniel. I had a small apartment with a view of the park. But there was always this hollow space inside me, this room in my heart that belonged to a ghost. I thought about him every single day. Sometimes it was just a flash, a man on the street with the same walk, a song on the radio we used to dance to, the smell of the ocean. Other times it consumed me. I'd have dreams where he came home, where he walked through the door with that smile, and I'd wake up crying. Year 20 came quietly. I was 48 years old. Half my life had been spent waiting for a dead man. I'd finally started to make peace with it. Finally started to believe what everyone had told me, that he was gone, that I needed to let go. And then I saw him. It was late. I was folding laundry when the TV started playing a business interview. I wasn't even paying attention at first. It was just background noise while I worked through the pile of clothes on my bed. But then I heard the interviewer say something about marine technology, about innovation, about protecting the oceans. And there he was. I dropped the shirt I was holding. My legs went weak. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed because I thought I might pass out. Older, grayer, but that smile, Daniel's smile. His hair was different. It used to be thick and dark, always messy from the wind. Now it was silver at the temples, neatly styled. He wore an expensive suit, Glasses, he looked distinguished, successful, alive. He changed his name. He changed his life. But he didn't change the way he looked at the camera, that little smirk at the end of every sentence. I'd recognize it anywhere. It was the same expression he'd make when he was being interviewed for the local paper about some fishing competition he'd won. That slight, crooked smile. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners. The way he'd tilt his head just slightly to the left when he was thinking. The interviewer called him Dr. David Harris, CEO of Blumar Innovations. They talked about his company's work in sustainable fishing technology, about ocean conservation, about his vision for the future. He spoke with confidence, with authority. He used words Daniel never would have used, corporate jargon, technical terms, but underneath it all, it was his voice. Deeper maybe, refined, but unmistakably his. The dead don't give interviews. So what was my husband doing on live TV? I sat there frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him, a doppelganger. The world is full of people who resemble each other. But no, it was more than resemblance, it was him. I rewound the program, watched it again, and again. Each time I noticed something new, a gesture. The way he moved his hands when he talked, the way he paused before answering a difficult question. These weren't things you could fake. These weren't coincidences. I took screenshots on my phone, blurry at first because my hands were shaking so badly. I zoomed in on his face. That scar above his left eyebrow, Daniel got that when he was 12, fell off a dock. It was there, faded but visible. I told myself it couldn't be true. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat at my laptop, searching everything I could find about David Harris. There was a lot. News articles, press releases, conference appearances, social media profiles, though he didn't post much personally. His bio said he was from Portland. Same birth year as Daniel. Studied marine engineering, Daniel's field. The official biography said he grew up in Oregon, son of a school teacher and a librarian. Got his doctorate from a university in Seattle. Founded Blumar Innovations 12 years ago with a focus on sustainable marine technology. None of it matched Daniel's actual history. But the timeline was what got me. David Harris appeared in public records about 12 years ago. Before that, nothing. No social media history, no paper trail, no childhood photos, nothing. Like he simply materialized as a fully formed adult with a doctorate and a business plan. There was a scar on his left hand. Daniel had the same scar from a fishing accident when he was 17. I found a high-resolution photo from a tech conference where David Harris was shaking hands with some investor. I zoomed in on his left hand. There it was. A jagged scar running from his thumb to his wrist. Daniel got that scar when a fishing line snapped and tore through his palm. He'd needed 18 stitches. He used to joke that it was his battle wound. I compared every photo I could find, the shape of his ears, the way his hairline receded, a small mole on his neck, every detail matched. I dug deeper, found something that made my blood run cold. I requested public records, death certificates, insurance claims. It took days to get the information, and I barely ate or slept while I waited. When the documents finally came, I read them over and over, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 10 years after he died, a life insurance payout was processed in his name. $200,000, the same year Blumar Innovations was founded. The insurance company had required a death certificate to process the claim. I'd been the beneficiary, but I never received any money. I called the insurance company. After hours on hold, being transferred between departments, I finally got answers. The payout had been redirected. Someone had filed additional paperwork claiming to be Daniel's business partner, showing documentation of a debt owed. The money had been transferred to an offshore account. From there, it disappeared into a maze of shell companies and international transactions. But I kept digging, hired a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking hidden assets. It cost me nearly all my savings. What he found was damning. The money trail led eventually to the initial funding for Blumar Innovations. It had been laundered through several countries, invested in cryptocurrency, moved around to obscure its origins. But it was there. He took my grief and turned it into capital. That's when the shock turned to rage. It's one thing to disappear, to start over, but to use the insurance money from your own faked death, to profit from the devastation you left behind, that was calculated. That was cruel. I couldn't stop shaking. I threw up. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. 20 years of grief, and it had all been a lie. 20 years of thinking he was dead. And he'd been out there, building an empire on my suffering. And then I found her. It was late at night, maybe 3 a.m. I was deep into my research, going through every link, every photo, every mention of David Harris online. That's when I stumbled across a lifestyle magazine article from 5 years ago. Tech CEO finds balance between work and family. That was the headline. The photo showed David Harris at a charity event, his arm around a tall blonde woman in an elegant dress. She was beautiful, younger than me. She smiled at the camera like she belonged there. The caption identified her as Melissa Harris, his wife. The article mentioned they'd been married for 10 years. It talked about their 2 children, a boy and a girl, ages 8 and 6 in the photo. He remarried. 10 years ago, he had children. He built a whole new life. I found more photos, birthday parties, school events, family vacations to places I'd only dreamed of visiting. They looked happy, normal, like any other successful family living their best life. His son looked like him, same dark eyes, same smile. In one photo, the boy was holding a toy boat and David was crouched down next to him, pointing at something on the water. It was such a tender moment, such a father-son moment. I wondered if he ever told them about me, about his first life. His first wife. Probably not. Why would he? In his new story, I didn't exist. He didn't die. He started over. And he did it so completely, so thoroughly, that there was no trace of Daniel Chen left in David Harris. He'd erased himself, erased us, erased 28 years of his life like they never happened. I spent days trying to understand why. What could make a man do this? What kind of debt or danger or desperation would drive someone to fake their own death and abandon everyone they loved? I thought about confronting him, calling his office, showing up at his house, exposing him, but what would that accomplish? Would it bring back the 20 years I'd lost? Would it erase the grief? Would it somehow make me whole again? No, but I needed answers. I needed to look him in the eye and hear him explain himself. I needed to know if any of it had been real. Our love, our marriage, our plans. Had it all meant nothing? He was speaking at a charity gala for ocean conservation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The event was 3 weeks away. I had time to prepare, time to decide what I wanted to say, time to imagine 1,000 different scenarios of how it might go. I bought a ticket. It wasn't cheap. $500 for the privilege of sitting in a room with wealthy donors while they wrote checks and felt good about themselves. But I didn't care about the cost. I needed to be there. I bought a new dress. Black, elegant, expensive. I got my hair done, my makeup. I wanted to look good, not for him, but for me. I wanted to walk into that room with my head held high. I wanted him to see that I'd survived, that his disappearance hadn't destroyed me, even though there were years when it nearly did. For 20 years, I imagined this moment, what I'd say, what he'd say. I rehearsed speeches in my mind. Sometimes I was calm and collected, asking him rational questions about why and how. Other times I imagined screaming at him, making a scene, exposing him in front of everyone. I fantasized about both scenarios equally. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment until sunrise. I looked at old photos of us, really looked at them, trying to see if there had been signs. Had he been planning this even then? When we were laughing on the beach, was he already thinking about escape? When he kissed me goodbye that Tuesday morning, did he know it was really goodbye? The day of the gala arrived. I put on my dress, did my makeup with shaking hands. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked strong, put together, nothing like the broken mess I'd been for so many years. The venue was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, wealthy people in designer clothes sipping champagne and making small talk. I felt out of place, but I walked in anyway, chin up, shoulders back. I found a seat near the front. Not so close that he'd notice me immediately, but close enough that when he did, he couldn't miss me. When he looked at me, I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He was scared. He was midway through his speech when it happened. He was talking about the importance of ocean conservation, about protecting marine ecosystems for future generations. The crowd was hanging on every word. His eyes swept across the audience, a practiced gesture he'd probably done 1,000 times. And then they landed on me. He froze just for a second. Maybe no one else noticed, but I saw it. The color drained from his face. His hand gripped the podium. He lost his place in the speech, stumbled over a word, then recovered. But his eyes kept darting back to me, making sure I was real, making sure he wasn't imagining it. When the speech ended, he rushed off the stage. I knew he'd try to leave, try to avoid me, so I followed. Through the crowd, down a hallway, until I found him alone in a small room backstage. We stood there, facing each other. 20 years collapsed into a single moment. Laura said, "You died, remember?" My voice was steadier than I expected. Calm, almost cold. I'd imagined yelling, crying, breaking down. But when the moment came, all I felt was this strange, detached clarity. David said I had no choice. His voice was different. Still his voice, but refined, educated in a way it hadn't been before. He looked older up close, lines around his eyes, gray in his beard. He looked tired, scared, guilty. Laura said, "No choice but to bury your life and me with it." He flinched at that, actually flinched, like the words had physically struck him. He looked down at his hands, those hands I used to hold, those hands that used to touch my face. Now they were the hands of a stranger. David said there were people after me, debts I couldn't pay. If they'd found me, they would have come for you too. I had to disappear. His explanation came out in a rush. He'd gotten involved with the wrong people, borrowed money from loan sharks to cover some debt his father had left. The interest kept growing. They started threatening him, threatening to hurt me if he didn't pay. He said he panicked. The storm gave him an opportunity, a chance to disappear and start over. He said he thought if everyone believed he was dead, they'd stop looking. They'd leave me alone. Laura said, "So you faked your death, took the insurance money, and left me to grieve a ghost." I let each word hang in the air. I wanted him to hear them, to really hear them, to understand what he'd done. David said, "I did it to protect you." He actually believed it. I could see it in his eyes. He'd convinced himself that abandoning me was somehow noble. That letting me think he was dead for 20 years was a kindness. Laura said, "You didn't protect me. You condemned me to 20 years of ghost love." My voice cracked on that last part. The anger was breaking through the calm. 20 years. 20 years of my life spent mourning someone who was alive. 20 years of grief and loneliness and trying to rebuild a life from ashes that didn't need to exist. He started to speak again, to offer more excuses, more justifications. But I held up my hand. Laura said, "Do you have any idea what you took from me? It wasn't just you. It was my future. It was every plan we made, every dream we shared. You didn't just fake your death, Daniel. You killed me too. You just left me alive to suffer through it." He was crying now, silent tears running down his face. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at seeing him break, but mostly I just felt empty. David said, "I thought about reaching out so many times, especially in the beginning. I'd write letters I never sent. I'd look you up online, see what you were doing. I saw you moved, saw you were teaching again. Part of me hoped you'd moved on, found someone new." Laura said, "I tried. God knows I tried. But how do you move on from a ghost? How do you close a door that never got shut? You took that from me. You took my closure. You took my ability to heal properly. And for what? So you could build a tech company, so you could have a new family." He didn't have an answer for that. What answer could there be? We stood there in silence, the weight of 20 years pressing down on us both. David said, "I know you probably hate me. You have every right to. What I did was unforgivable. I've lived with that guilt every single day." Laura said, "Funny thing about guilt, though, you still get to live. You still get to build a life. You still get to be happy. I spent 20 years in limbo, so forgive me if I don't feel too bad about your guilt." He begged for forgiveness, said he'd done it for me, but I realized something that night. Standing there, looking at this man who was and wasn't my husband, I understood something I'd been too close to see before. If he could live 20 years without me, then I could live the rest of mine without him. He wasn't the person I'd loved. That person, whoever he had been, was gone. Maybe he never existed in the way I remembered. Maybe I'd built him up in my mind, turned him into this perfect lost love, when really he was just a scared man who made terrible choices. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his explanation. I didn't even need his guilt. What I needed was to let go, not of the love we'd had, but of the hold that loss had over me. Laura said, "I spent 20 years waiting for you to come home, waiting for closure, waiting for peace. I thought seeing you again would give me that. But standing here now, I realize you can't give me what I need. You never could. I have to give it to myself." He reached for me, as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. Laura said, "I hope you're happy with your new life. I hope it was worth it. But you don't get to have both. You don't get to keep your secret life and have me understand. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk out of here. You're going to stay away from me. And we're going to pretend this conversation never happened. You'll get to keep your perfect life. And I'll get to finally bury my dead husband." David said, "Laura, please." But I was already walking away. Some people disappear to escape their past. Others face it and finally find peace. I walked out of that building into the cool night air. It was raining, the kind of soft rain that feels like a cleansing. I stood there for a moment, face turned up to the sky, letting the water wash over me. 20 years of grief and longing and unanswered questions. And in one night, it was over. Not because I got the answers I wanted, not because he gave me closure, but because I chose to let go. I think I just found mine. I took off my wedding ring. I'd never stopped wearing it. Even after all these years, it had stayed on my finger, a promise to a ghost, a chain to the past. I held it in my palm for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I dropped it in a trash can on the corner. It wasn't dramatic. There was no symbolism, no throwing it into the ocean or burying it at his memorial. It was just a piece of metal that didn't mean anything anymore, so I let it go. I walked home in the rain. By the time I got to my apartment, I was soaked through, but I felt lighter, like I'd put down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I don't hate him anymore. In a way, I'm grateful, because by pretending to die, he taught me how to truly live again. The next morning, I woke up and felt different. The first thing I did wasn't think about Daniel. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't my first thought. I made coffee. I opened the curtains and let light flood my apartment. I looked at photos I'd kept hidden, really looked at them. Not with longing or grief, but with the distant fondness you might feel for an old friend you've lost touch with. I called my mother, told her I was ready to clean out the closet. She came over that weekend, and we packed up all of Daniel's things. His clothes went to charity. His personal items went into a single box that I'd give to his parents if they wanted it. As we worked, my mother cried. I didn't. I think that surprised her. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. For the first time in a very long time, I actually meant it. I started dadding again. Really dadding, not just going through the motions. I met a kind man named Robert at a teacher's conference. He made me laugh. He didn't try to fix me or save me. He just liked spending time with me. I told him about Daniel on our third date. The whole story, including the part about seeing him alive. Robert listened without judgment. When I finished, he just said that he was sorry I'd gone through that, but he was glad it led me to where I was now. I traveled, places I'd always wanted to see but never had. Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. I went alone and I loved it. I sent postcards to friends. I took photos. I lived. I even went back to the ocean, stood on a beach and watched the waves. I wasn't afraid anymore. It was just water. Beautiful, powerful, indifferent water. If someone you loved came back from the dead, would you forgive them? People ask me that sometimes when I tell my story, and my answer is always the same. It doesn't matter. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. It's about choosing to let go of the anger and pain so it doesn't poison the rest of your life. Whether they deserve it is irrelevant. I forgave Daniel, not because what he did was okay, not because I understand or accept his choices, but because carrying that resentment was too heavy, and I wanted to be free. Some people hear my story and think it's tragic, a woman who lost her husband twice, but I don't see it that way. I see a woman who survived something impossible, who rebuilt herself from nothing, who learned that closure doesn't come from other people, it comes from within. I'm 50 now, half a century old, and I'm happy, really genuinely happy. I have a life I love, people I care about, dreams I'm still chasing. Daniel's disappearance, his fake death, his betrayal, it doesn't define me anymore. It's just something that happened. A chapter in my story, but not the whole book. And that's more than I ever thought possible during those dark years, when grief was all I knew. So yes, I saw my dead husband on TV. Yes, he faked his death and built a new life. Yes, he broke my heart in ways I didn't think were possible. But I survived, I healed, I found peace. And in the end, that's the only answer that matters.